If we get to 5% of the supply, Bitcoin's probably going to be 1 million a coin. And if we get to 7.5% of the supply, Bitcoin will be 10 million a coin. And then if I'm lucky enough to grind to 10% of the supply, Bitcoin's going to be 50 million a coin, and someone will be whining that whatever, we have too much Bitcoin. But
so in my 9 years in Bitcoin, I have never been more concerned than I am today, because I actually think Michael Saylor is completely wrong in that clip I just played with you. And I firmly and strongly believe that Bitcoin is going to actually be worth much more than $50 million a coin, because if Michael Saylor can get his hands on more than 10% of the Bitcoin supply, I have the maths and the step-by-step framework and formula to show you why the Bitcoin price won't be anywhere near $50 million per coin. It's actually going to be worth a lot more. But before I get to that, let's look at the supply suffocation. Nobody understands this chart right here. Everybody understands, yes, there's 21 million Bitcoin, but nobody understands that only 6% of the Bitcoin are left today. That's right, something like 19.8 million Bitcoin have been mined today in 2025. And the really scary part about this exponential chart we're looking at is that by the year 2036, this is only 11 years away, 99% of all of the Bitcoin that will ever exist will have already been mined. And of the 19.8 million Bitcoin that's available for sale today, it's being distributed, it's being given to the miners, and somebody around the world is holding on to those coins. Most people don't understand. 5 million Bitcoin, it's been lost forever. Satoshi Nakamoto, he holds 1 million coins. And now we have entities like Michael Saylor already squatting on 600,000 Bitcoin and publicly announcing a plan to buy $84 billion of more Bitcoin. So yes, that does imply another 800,000 Bitcoins that are going to end up on the balance sheet of MicroStrategy. And in the words of Michael Saylor himself, not going to move for 100 years. This is the thing that's really starting to concern me. If one individual can hold 7.5% of the total supply of Bitcoin and he's not going to sell it for 100 years, what happens with the other large entities who might want to hold a lot of Bitcoin? Let's not forget, Michael Saylor today already holds more Bitcoin than every single nation state combined. That's right, the US holds something like 190,000 coins, China holds around 185,000 coins, the Great British Empire, the fallen empire from the 18th century, they hold about 60,000 Bitcoin, and it doesn't matter how many nations you want to throw into a big pot. If you combine the total holdings of every single country around the world, they do not amount to the 600,000 Bitcoin that Michael Saylor owns. And this is what is beginning to concern me. Michael Saylor is one of 2,500 billionaires. He is one public CEO out of 58,000 public companies. And he's openly declaring a war on the Bitcoin supply. He's openly saying, I want 7.5% of the Bitcoin supply. And I think he's being a little bit conservative in the clip I just played for you, where he says the price of Bitcoin is going to be $50 million a coin if I can achieve my plan. And that is all because of what we're about to look at here in a moment. Because I can already hear that tapping away on the keyboards from the comment section down below. People were saying, Luke, this supply crisis that you're talking about, it's all hypothetical. There will always be a seller of Bitcoin. Now, I am hearing all the comments, and I'm going to be answering all these questions in a moment, but I first want to talk about the 3 separate races that is really starting to concern me. Because when we understand the incentives of each of these 3 races to accumulate Bitcoin, I think the questions that are already beginning to flood the comment section of this video will be answered before we even finish this one. So the first race I'm really concerned about is the billionaire race. These entities are a lot more nimble. These entities, like Saylor, can just press smash buy on a Sunday morning and accumulate 10,000 Bitcoin just because they understand what Bitcoin is. As soon as that light bulb goes off and they have that change of mind, they can buy Bitcoin instantly. They're not like a nation state. They're not like a public board that has all of these legal hoops that need to be jumped through. Once a billionaire understands Bitcoin, they can buy it immediately. And the really concerning statistic that we're faced with today is this one right here. So Michael holds 600,000 Bitcoin, and in the near future, every single billionaire is going to come to the realization that to be richer than Michael Saylor in a world where Bitcoin continues to appreciate in price, the only way you can be richer than Michael Saylor is to hold more Bitcoin than Michael Saylor. The concerning part of this equation is, today there's only 2.5 million Bitcoin sitting on exchanges available for sale. And this number has been dropping like a rock for 5 years consistently. Since mid-2022, we've actually seen 900,000 Bitcoin consistently leave the exchanges. So if we simply extrapolate this data forward, I'm concerned because there's only enough Bitcoin on exchanges for 4 other billionaires to buy more Bitcoin than Michael Saylor. But before we even run those maths, I want to answer the question and the thoughts that many of you guys might be having right now. Some people might be asking the question, why would other billionaires want to buy more Bitcoin than Michael Saylor? Would they actually want to copy him? I mean, the narrative over the past 5 years has been that Michael Saylor is a little bit of a unique individual. He not only has unique situations when it comes to the corporate structure of his company MicroStrategy, he has a large amount of the voting shares. He's a unique individual who has a unique set of knowledge. I've called him the walking, talking encyclopedia for some years now. So people have doubted that other billionaires would ever copy Michael and employ a Bitcoin treasury strategy as aggressively as he has implemented. But I think that narrative has been absolutely cut off at the ankles. If we have a look at this chart right here, we can see 190 other publicly traded companies have Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And we can see between public companies and ETFs, over 3 million Bitcoin have been scooped off the exchanges and put into the coffers of ETFs, of treasuries, and into the corporate balance sheets of over 180 public companies. So I think the narrative that the billionaires and the other public corporations won't adopt Bitcoin and cannot employ a strategy as aggressive as Michael's, I think that narrative has completely died because people are simply not paying attention. They're not having a look at what is happening. And nearly every week, nearly every day, we get another announcement of a public company who has a CEO who's come out and said, guess what? I was wrong. We are putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet of our public corporation. And I mean, we can see it very clearly. Other billionaires like Mexico's third richest man, Ricardo Salinas, is openly saying the quiet parts out loud. That's right, he's got more than 25% of his net worth in Bitcoin. Cathie Wood might not be a billionaire, but she's a multi-hundred millionaire. She also has a similar allocation to Bitcoin. And then, of course, we have the world's largest asset managers and hedge funds. These guys are very important to look at and understand because it is these entities, along with the billionaires and the public corporations, that do hold the majority of the $900 trillion of global wealth in the world. So we need to watch very carefully what they are doing and what they are saying. BlackRock recently said that Bitcoin might actually be risky to not own in the not too distant future. This is also coming after them dropping a report in early 2025 where they said you need a 2% allocation to Bitcoin. Let's not forget this video that was posted on the network of Charles Schwab, again, a $5 trillion asset manager, saying the following. So we have BlackRock recommending a 2% allocation to Bitcoin. We have Charles Schwab saying if you do not have a 10% allocation to Bitcoin, you are getting left behind. And then we have the hedge funds. There is over 15,000 hedge funds around the world. They control over $5 trillion of capital, and more than 50% of all of the hedge funds in the world have an allocation to Bitcoin. And of the top 25 hedge funds in the world, 17 of them currently own Bitcoin. And you know what I always talk about here on the channel? Going from 0 to 1% is so much more difficult than going from a 1% Bitcoin allocation to a 10% Bitcoin allocation. Why is that? Well, that's because it takes years, if not decades, of reprogramming of someone's brain for them to actually finally admit, okay, I was wrong. Having a 0% allocation to Bitcoin is the wrong allocation. I'm going to get a small dip my toe in the water allocation of 1%. That is so much more difficult for somebody to do for multiple different reasons. Obviously, the sunk cost fallacy is one of those. But once you have a 1% allocation and you see it slowly grow in your portfolio, again, nobody has ever bought Bitcoin and held it for 3 years and lost money. This is why we say it is number go up technology. And once you do get a 1% allocation and you see your 1% slowly grow and represent 2, 3, maybe 5% of your total portfolio, it's pretty difficult to not want to increase your allocation. And this is where the numbers start to get a little bit wonky. Because if 50% of the world's hedge funds have an allocation to Bitcoin, and we have billionaires like Michael Saylor single-handedly wanting to hold 7.5% of the total Bitcoin supply, the numbers we're about to run are about to get even more interesting. Because if every billionaire or every hedge fund or every asset manager wanted to buy more Bitcoin than Michael Saylor, it's not just infeasible, it's damn near impossible without moving the price aggressively. So let's run the maths here for a minute. If there's around 2,500 billionaires, that actually means that there is only enough Bitcoin for 1 in every 625 billionaires to buy more Bitcoin than Michael Saylor. Think about that for a minute. The richest people in the world, they're rich for good reason. Yes, I get it. Some people are born into wealth. Some people are lucky. Some people hit black in the lottery and they do win billions of dollars through pure luck. But let's be real for a minute. 99% of the world's billionaires, they became rich because they're actually smart. They noticed a trend earlier than the masses and they capitalized on that trend in one way, shape, or form. So do we really think that 0.25% of the world's billionaires, do we really think that they're not going to come to the same realization that Michael Saylor's come to? Now let's not forget, this first little hypothetical thought experiment we just ran through only assumes Michael Saylor stops buying and he has 600,000 Bitcoin. He's publicly announced his intentions to buy another $84 billion worth of Bitcoin. And let's not forget what happened in late 2024. Michael came out with a 3-year plan to buy $42 billion worth of Bitcoin. Most people thought he was crazy at the time. Most people said, good luck buying $42 billion of Bitcoin in 3 years. Those are pretty crazy, lofty standards and expectations that you're putting on your company, Michael. I don't think it's possible. Well, guess what? The market was not only wrong, it was fabulously wrong because Michael executed this 3-year plan in about 3 months. So this is why there's a little bit of urgency in my tone today. Michael just announced another $84 billion plan. How long do you think it's going to take him to buy that $84 billion of Bitcoin? And the second race I think we're seeing in the space is actually amongst nation states. Now, before we run the maths, I can already hear what some of you guys are already thinking and even commenting down below. But Luke, Michael's a little bit of a rare case. He's a rare individual. He's a unique individual. He's a little bit different. Now, don't get me wrong, we're all a little bit different. I understand that, but something that a lot of you guys need to understand is I think that was a 2020 narrative. A lot of people are saying other public companies will not copy Michael Saylor, not only because they don't have the same understanding of technology, Bitcoin, economics, and politics that Michael Saylor does have, but he also has a unique position in his company. He has a controlling voting power. He has more than 50% of the outstanding voting shares for MicroStrategy. And I've, again, listened to that argument for a couple of years, and I wondered whether it would be true or not. And the bears have been proven fabulously wrong. Second, more interesting race over Bitcoin that I think is going to be unfolding over the next 5 years has to do with those people that Larry Fink just mentioned. I know a lot of people would have had their attention taken away with those big numbers and those big price predictions. 500, 600, $700,000 Bitcoin. I get it. The world's largest asset manager can certainly grab some attention with those kind of price predictions. But I'm more interested with who Larry Fink was talking about. He was talking about sovereign wealth funds. He was talking about the private conversations that he himself, Larry Fink, is having with sovereign wealth funds. And let's not forget, they control more than $50 trillion of capital globally. Now let's not forget, it's not just Larry Fink, the world's largest asset manager, exposing the moves of these sovereign wealth funds. We also have Coinbase insiders saying the exact same thing. So we can see now we're beginning to get public confirmation that nation states are FOMOing into Bitcoin. There's a list of over 30 nation states around the world who are publicly embracing and actively publicly trying to implement a strategic Bitcoin reserve. States all across America are successfully jumping over hurdles, and they're about to be putting Bitcoin onto the balance sheets of their state treasuries. And we also have over a handful nation states who have already partnered up and started investing billions of dollars into Bitcoin mining operations. And then something else that's incredibly public is we have all of these Bitcoin peer-to-peer economies popping up in nation states all around the world. Now, this number of peer-to-peer communities, it's growing exponentially. And I think it's interesting because, again, we have to think about things for a minute. If a nation state was so aggressively anti-Bitcoin, do you really think they would allow a peer-to-peer economy with hundreds, if not thousands of vendors and merchants all using Bitcoin in their country? No, I don't think you would. I think a thriving peer-to-peer economy where you have hundreds, if not thousands of merchants accepting Bitcoin and they're allowed to grow and continue doing what they're doing, I think that's a little bit of a hint or a clue of what that nation state truly does feel and think about Bitcoin. Let's not forget here, Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador actually started all the way back in 2019, more than 2 years before Bukele embraced Bitcoin and made it legal tender in Bitcoin country in El Salvador. Now that's neither here nor there. Who knows what nation states are privately thinking about Bitcoin or privately doing? Again, most Bitcoiners have speculated for a long time that nation states have been quietly mining Bitcoin, they're quietly accumulating Bitcoin, as we're going to be having a look here in a moment when we look at the third race that's going on. And we actually start crunching some numbers behind when and what this endgame might look like. You will see very clearly that a race to accumulate the Bitcoin on exchanges, or the final 2.1 million coins, it's clearly started, it's clearly on. But I think the Kingdom of Bhutan is a story that confirms a lot of the unfounded conspiracy theorists in the Bitcoin space who have copped a lot of heat for a long time. Because we've all said nation states would be stupid to not accumulate in Bitcoin. But when this news headline came out in 2024, confirming that the Kingdom of Bhutan had been secretly mining and buying Bitcoin since 2019 for their nation's treasury, this was a little bit of a concerning signal yet again for myself, because I think it confirms that there are other entities doing the exact same thing that the Kingdom of Bhutan has been doing since 2019. Silently, privately setting up Bitcoin mining operations and buying as much Bitcoin as they can. Again, today the Kingdom of Bhutan is squatting on a Bitcoin stack that's about $1.5 billion in size. It's more than half of the size of their GDP. And this fun fact about Bhutan is yet another reminder that the little guy, like you and I, we have that disproportionate advantage when it comes to Bitcoin. This is why I've been screaming from the rooftops for many years that you guys need to buy a significant amount of Bitcoin today while we still can. Because when we do run the numbers of having a look at the third little simulation or race that I want to show you guys today, it will become abundantly clear that maybe our days to buy generational wealth, whether that be 1 Bitcoin, 0.1 Bitcoin, or even 0.01 Bitcoin, those days could be evaporating pretty quickly. But again, if you still want to implement a strategy like the Kingdom of Bhutan is doing and going all in on Bitcoin, I always encourage you guys, if you're going to buy Bitcoin, buy it from a safe place. You can do that from the Bitcoin Well. They have a white glove concierge service that actually walks you through the buying process of Bitcoin with your very own specialist. So as you can see, click on the link in the description of today's show and you can book a call with a specialist at your earliest convenience. And again, once you've bought your Bitcoin from the Bitcoin Well, I always encourage you guys, do what El Salvador is doing with its Bitcoin. Take it off an exchange, store it in your own custody, put it in a hardware wallet, and back it up with titanium. I always tell you guys, do not write down your 12 or your 24 words on paper. I think titanium and the plates you can get from Stampseed should be the only thing you consider to back up your Bitcoin with. Again, you guys can get a 15% off discount on anything you want to buy from Stampseed with that promo code Luke15. So what is that third race I want to talk about today? This is the race for individuals. I've commonly talked about the race to free your family from fiat forever in the past. Right now, I'm assuming that there might be 10 million Bitcoin available for sale out of the 21 million coins. If that is true, there's enough Bitcoin for, I think, 100 million families to secure generational wealth forever. But I truly think those days of securing generational wealth could be shrinking because of the charts I want to show you right now. So this gets me talking about the end game. If there is this magical supply suffocation that you're talking about, Luke, why should I care now, today? Because I genuinely think things are going critical. I genuinely think the next 6 months have the potential to really shake things up. And that's all because of the charts I want to show you right now. So we can see very clearly, we have 900,000 Bitcoin leaving the exchanges every 2 years. If this trend continues, and again, this is a 5-year trend, this began in 2020, this would mean that there would be no Bitcoin on exchanges before 2030. But I'm far more concerned. Again, 5 years. There's a little bit of urgency in my tone today in this video, and that's because of the two things that just recently happened. Obviously, Michael Saylor, he's embarking on a new $84 billion Bitcoin buying plan. I think he's going to try to buy the $84 billion of Bitcoin in under 6 months. And then we have Coinbase in yet another clip leaking the plans of the US government and their attempts to buy $100 billion worth of Bitcoin. Now, people have been speculating about America dumping gold for Bitcoin, buying Bitcoin, putting Bitcoin in their newly stood up sovereign wealth fund that, of course, Cantor Fitzgerald, Howard Lutnick, is in charge of. He is, of course, a massive Bitcoin and MicroStrategy bull, if you can't tell by looking at his own personal portfolio. And everybody's been speculating, okay, America's going to buy Bitcoin, but how soon? That was Bo Hines, Donald Trump's right-hand man. As you can tell, he wants to buy Bitcoin pretty quickly. So we have Michael Saylor executing on an $84 billion Bitcoin buying plan pretty rapidly. We have America wanting to buy $100 billion worth of Bitcoin also pretty rapidly. The problem with this equation is there's about 2.5 million Bitcoin on exchanges. That means there's only $250 billion worth of Bitcoin on exchanges. And with America and Michael Saylor combined, that's $184 billion worth of demand. And we also need to factor in this chart right here, because we're assuming that America and Michael Saylor can buy all the Bitcoin without moving the price away from $100,000. We do know the less Bitcoin there is on exchanges, guess what happens to the multiplier effect? This thing continues to rise and rise and rise. Today, $1 of hypothetical demand for Bitcoin is pushing up the Bitcoin market cap by 6x. This is, of course, a new all-time high. Another thing that leads me to believe that maybe the exchanges could be drained of Bitcoin much sooner than we might think. And then we also have this chart. This is showing that typically Bitcoin lags the growth of the M2 money supply by about 120 days. And what has the money supply done in the past 120 days? Aggressively ripped higher. What is Bitcoin just beginning to do now? Slowly but surely, it's beginning to follow the global money supply. So I think considering all of the above, we have an aggressive expansion of the money supply with Bitcoin set to follow in the next 120 days. And we have $180 billion of demand that wants to buy Bitcoin with a supply crisis conundrum. What comes next? What is the end game? What happens to the price of Bitcoin if there is zero Bitcoin on exchanges? Well, I'm here to tell you, the price of Bitcoin doesn't go to 500,000, 5 million, or even $50 million a coin. The price of Bitcoin is probably going much higher than you can even imagine. And you're also probably going to need far less Bitcoin than you might think to retire on a Bitcoin standard. And this is purely because people don't understand the fact that there's only 6% of the Bitcoin left. There's only 1.2 million Bitcoin that will be mined over the next 115 years. And if this supply suffocation continues the way it has been going for the past 5 years, you are probably going to be surprised when you see just how little Bitcoin I think you need to retire in the not too distant future. I filmed a deep dive having a look at the retirement crisis that I think is going on and why Bitcoin's a solution. I'll put a link to that video that you do not want to miss, somewhere around there. And also don't forget to check out my recent interview with Samson Mao. I'm going to put a link to that one up on over there. And well, I said, thank you so much for everyone who tuned in. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of it, and I'll see you in the next one.